Good morning, distinguished Chancellor. Buongiorno, dear colleagues. It's a great honor to be here today. A special thank you to Monsignor Sanchez Sorondo, Ms. Archer for inviting us. My name is Vladimir Aras. Currently, I'm the head of the International Cooperation Unit within the Office of the Prosecutor General in Brazil. I work in Brasilia, our capital, and I deal mostly with incoming and outgoing MLA requests in criminal matters. Today, I would like to address the issue of international cooperation to tackle organized crime, especially in the context of human trafficking. I also would like to present a few remarks on the relationship between corruption and organized crime. The question is, what can be done in the international level? This question brings us to the global regimes against serious crimes. My point is to show that, at least from the 80s, with the Vienna Convention, the international community is worried with this menace. As you know and may see, the global legal framework is very complex. Many conventions, many treaties, many national laws. In Brazil, the Brazilian prosecutors and judges can rely on those treaties and on domestic legislation to prosecute felons and protect their victims. I'd like to express how important those conventions are to the effectiveness of complex prosecutions, especially when it comes to investigate the relationship between corruption, human trafficking, money laundering, and other forms of organized crime. What's the reason for this international legal framework? Nowadays, it's easy to travel abroad, to buy goods anywhere, to wire money to other countries in a few minutes. We live in a global economy. The criminals also went global. What's the consequence of it? We need a global treatment for crime and criminals, observing the rule of law. In my point of view, this global criminal law policy has 4 pillars: approximation of national criminal laws, the introduction of legislation on special investigative techniques, the training programs for judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement agents, the international cooperation in criminal matters to get evidence abroad, to freeze and recover assets, to extradite criminals, and protect their victims. And of course, respect the minimum standards for procedural rights in criminal proceedings. Corruption facilitates trafficking of human beings. Bribery makes it easier buying passports, visas, crossing borders, escaping from justice. This makes me think of the anti-trafficking paradigm, which includes 4 main tasks for law enforcement agents, prosecutors, and judges. The words are prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnership. In order to achieve all of this, prevent crime, protect victims, and prosecute, try, and convict the perpetrators, it's of paramount importance to build alliances with the private sector when appropriate, and foreign law enforcement agencies and foreign prosecutors. The word, of course, is partnership. The subject is international cooperation in legal matters, including the assistance for victims in human trafficking cases. Considering the aim of cooperating, I would like to take a quick look at 2 human trafficking cases I am familiar to. This slide shows the important role that UNTOC, the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, and its provisions, including the provisions of the protocols thereto. These provisions on MLA and the special investigative techniques play a very important role to ensure the success of a prosecution in complex cases, especially when it is of a transnational nature. In this case, from Bahia, It's the case Princess of the Hinterland or the Backlands in Bahia. We saw the disappearance of a teenager, and the police investigating this disappearance unveiled a criminal ring for sexual exploitation in that region of Brazil. There were 3 associated groups operating in a cluster-like operation. One of them was specialized in ID theft to commit fraud against credit card holders, and the other 2 groups were engaged in the trafficking itself. The money was laundered in Brazil and in Europe, and 32 victims were identified, and they were mostly vulnerable women who were flown from Brazil to Spain and to Italy, in Milano. The Federal Prosecution Service used special investigative techniques to identify the perpetrators, issued MLA requests to Spain and Italy to get evidence and to get one of the criminals who was living in Spain, to asset freezing, and to obtain convictions and confiscation in Brazil before a federal court in the city of Feira de Santana. Now you can see another case, and this is a heinous case. It's a human trafficking case for human organs harvesting. Poor people from the state of Pernambuco in the Brazilian northeast region were flown from Recife, the capital of Pernambuco. It's a state in Brazil. They were flown from Recife to Durban in South Africa, where they had their kidneys removed for transplants into Israeli patients. The donors, I use comma here, were conned by a criminal ring, and in Durban, a corporation which runs hospitals there and in other nations took part in an international scam that saw poor Brazilians and Romanians as well paid more or less 4,000 pounds for their kidneys to be transplanted for wealthy Israelis. In this hospital in Durban, back in 2010, the company, after the investigation in Brazil, South Africa, and Israel, the company pleaded guilty on 102 counts relating to illegal operations between June 2001 and November 2003. These counts include 5 of unlawful acquiring and transplanting human kidney by acquiring kidneys from 5 minors at the time the kidneys were transplanted. These transplants took place, as I already said, in South Africa hospitals in Durban. And those Israeli citizens in need of the kidney transplant would be brought to South Africa to the surgeries, and they paid the kidney suppliers for these operations. The kidneys were initially sourced from Israeli citizens, but later Romanian and Brazilian citizens were recruited as the kidneys were obtainable at much lower cost than those of the Israeli suppliers. The documents related to surgeries were forged to make it appear that the recipient and the donor were family members, because this is a requirement of South African law. And the kidney suppliers were paid much more, the Israeli kidney suppliers were paid much more than the Brazilians. This is really sad, but my colleagues in the Federal Prosecution Service and the federal courts did their jobs, and many of them were convicted in Brazil, a dozen of them. The important thing now is to understand that we must be prepared. For this reason, in order to tackle money laundering, Brazilian government and independent agencies, prosecution services, and courts get together every year to establish some goals to be achieved the next year by each institution. NCLA stands for National Strategy Against Corruption and Money Laundering, was initiated in 2003, and in this National Steering Committee, this matter is considered, and other predicate offenses are dealt with in this coordinated work of Brazilian Federation to tackle organized crime. NCLA includes proposals for enacting new legislation, capacity building, and cooperation of law enforcement agencies. Another important initiative is the campaign Corruption No, or in Portuguese, Corrupção Não. This campaign, sponsored by the Brazilian Attorney General, was created within the Associación Ibero-Americana de Ministérios Públicos, Inter-American Association of Public Prosecution Services, to promote the rule of law in this field in all its 21 member countries, from Europe, Portugal, and Spain, and other Latin American countries. It was supported by all attorney generals of the region, including Mr. Javier Díaz-Verón from Paraguay, and Mr. Jorge Chavarria Guzman from Costa Rica, both present here. We have billboards, banners, flyers, radio and video spots, both in Portuguese and in Spanish, and a complete set of those announcements can be shared with other agencies or courts if needed. Finally, it's important to stress our commitment with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, Objetivo de Desarrollo Sostenible. As some speakers before me have already remarked, we should pay attention to item 8.7, take immediate and effective measures to eradicate forced labor and modern slavery and human trafficking, and secure the prohibition and elimination of the worst forms of child labor. But I would like to draw your attention to other items, 16.2, 16.4, and 16.5, where we can see the relationship between the fight against organized crime and the fight against corruption. Substantially reduce corruption and bribery in all their forms, so as the world has a new agenda to be achieved by 2030. This is 15 years from now, and my time is running, the time is running, and I think we should hurry. This brings me to the end of my presentation. I would like to conclude by saying again that fighting corruption is paramount to tackle organized crime. When I consider the history of my country, Brazil, I recall that millions of Africans were displaced, enslaved, and forcibly shipped to Brazil and other nations of the Americas. In this African diaspora, millions of lives were lost or changed forever. We cannot, of course, change the past. Here in this room, under the blessing of Pope Francis, we all renewed our vow to continue the struggle for protecting the future of many millions more to come. It's the end of my speech, but prosecutors and judges may not rest. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.